Greetings and welcome to Session 7, Introduction to Chord Types. My name is Jerry and I'd like to begin by reminding you from Session 1 that the primary goal of this learning series, how chords are formed and used for absolute beginners, is obviously to get you forming chords as soon as possible. As you can see in our map, this will remind us of where we have been, where we are, and where we are going. Congratulations! We are finally where we have all the knowledge and tools to understand the different types of chords that there are out there. Since we now know note letter names from Session 2, note intervals from Session 3, note position numbers Session 4, semitone counting from Session 5, and chord formulas from Session 6, let's put all these pieces together to be able to form any chord without guesswork or experimentation. So the obvious objective all along is that in order to play a chord, any chord, you must first be able to identify the individual notes of that chord. And since chords are the foundation of every song, this quote chords first approach will allow the absolute beginner to begin playing something recognizable rather than just practicing fingering positions and or memorizing scale notes as you begin learning the piano. Although I recognize that some music teacher purists might disagree with this learning strategy, I believe it makes perfect sense, especially for absolute beginners. So now let me introduce my special music friend Mike Furlong, who is an excellent guitarist and keyboardist. We have played rock and roll together in a band named Mist of Time for over 30 years and have spent countless hours conversing about music, theory, and chords. So here's Mike to give us a quick review.
Before proceeding, let's review what a chord is one last time to be sure we're on the same page. A chord is typically considered to be 3 or more notes that are played at the same time, whether on a piano or a guitar. And as a reminder again, chords begin their life first as a 3-note triad chord, regardless of how many notes are added or subtracted for a particular chord type. And we should know by now that chords are formed and named from any single note letter name, which refers to their root, tonic, or start note, all 3 terms meaning the same thing.
Now let's take an overall look at how chord types fall into groups based upon the number of notes they contain. These groups are just my names to keep things organized. And by the way, when you see or hear the term quote chord quality being used, it is also a common term used to describe chord types as well. They both mean the same thing. In this slide, I am showing you 4 groupings of chord types. Although this chart may seem intimidating at first, once we explore the details of each group, you'll begin to understand that the more advanced looking chords are formed by just adding notes to the basic triad notes. As you can see, within each of these quote groups, there is a variety of different chord types which provide us with a plethora of unique quote sounds and harmonious tones. These chord types are distinguished from one another because each type has its own unique set of note interval distances, although some intervals only vary by 1 semitone. That's really another way to say each chord type distinguishes itself because it's got its own separate chord formula. And to be crystal clear, I want you to understand that every different chord type can be played in all 18 major key signatures and all 18 minor key signatures. In other words, no chord type exists for only 1 letter chord name. Although there are other possible mathematical note interval combinations, we can place the majority, 99%, of the chords into these 4 chord type groups. As you can see, these 4 groups contain a variety of triad chords, 6th and 7th chords, extended chords, and altered chords. There are a couple of other groups such as, quote, add chords and, quote, shell chords, but we'll look at those down the road to keep confusion at a minimum now as they are infrequently used. And the best news of all, most of the chord types used in rock, pop, and country are centered on the triad and seventh chords. So let's get started.
Now let's begin our focus on the Group 1 triad 3-note chords, where all chords begin their life. This statement will be repeated many times, so keep this in mind. Notice that the common abbreviation for each chord type is included, as these are important symbols that are used in the naming of chords, which will be fully explained in Session 8. Notice, too, that the specific chord formula is included for each chord type in both the note position numbers and Semitone Count Numbers language. Also, there is a column to the right with chord naming examples that again will be fully explained in Session 8. So this chart gives us all the information we ever need to form any triad chord we wish. And in just a few moments, I hope you have an aha moment when you understand just how easy it is to form chords by the numbers. We will demonstrate chord forming using the easier to apply semitone count numbers of the formula rather than the harder to apply note position numbers, although they identify the same notes.
So let's begin by looking at the major triad chord type that we have now seen in several examples in previous sessions. This chord is said to be the most used chord in rock, pop, and country, making up about 70% of all the chord choices. And because of its frequent use, you might want to practice playing the major chord in every key signature. Let me demonstrate. And remember, the major chord type formula is simply 047 in semitone counting. So as long as I can remember 047, we're going to make a major chord in some key. Let's start with C that we've seen before. So if I find the C note here, and then I count up 4 semitones, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I count up 3 more to 7. So here's 4, 5, 6, 7. So we've got 0, 4, 7 semitone count, and that makes the major chord, in this case, a C major chord. Let's try a D major chord. Well, we're going to start on the D note, so if D is the start note in semitone counting, that's 0. Then we count up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6, 7. So we're going to play a D. A D major chord is still 047. We're just starting on the D note. Well, let's try an E. We're right here close. An E major chord would be starting on the E note as 0. Then we're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to go 5, 6, 7. So these 3 notes, 0, 4, 7 count in semitones, gives us an E major chord. Let's try an F. I'm going to move down so we can stay in our view. So if this, we're going to make an F major chord, we're going to start with the F note as 0. We count up 1, 2, 3, 4. And remember, we're counting in semitone counting. We count all the notes, black and white notes together. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's our second note, which is an A. Then 5, 6, 7, and a C. So to make a F major chord, we have the notes F, A, and C. So no matter where we play that here or another octave up, it's the same notes, and it's obtained by using the semitone count of 0, 4, and 7. Let's try a G chord, a G major chord. Here's G is the start note, which is always 0. So there's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6, 7. So a G has the notes G, B, and D. And we know that because that fits our formula of 0, 4, 7. Well, let's try an E flat. I think we can see it here. Let's start with a E flat note. So no matter whether we're starting with white notes or starting with a black note, if this is an E flat note, it's a black key, then that's considered in semitone counting a 0. Then we count 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6, 7. So an E flat major chord is E flat, G, and B flat. And that is consistent with our formula of 0, 4, 7. Same thing. Well, let's try an A chord. So here's the A note. That's 0 start, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6, 7. So our A major chord is the notes A, C sharp, and E. Whether it's here or up an octave or down an octave, that's how we know that that is a major chord type. That formula is always the same no matter what key we want to play it in. Here's a G sharp, starting with a black note again. G sharp is 0, count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that is a G sharp major chord. You could call that an A flat, but either one. Remember, we talked about those black notes having two different names, but it doesn't matter. The notes are the same. We've got a G sharp, a C, and a D sharp to make up that particular chord. Here's a B chord, a B major chord. We start with the B as our 0 count in semitone. We count up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we count on up to 7, 5, 6, 7. So a B major chord uses the same semitone count, 0, 4, 7, and it always gives us that same note intervals. That's why the formulas work. The chord formulas work as they do because they're helping us define without having to remember a bunch of other stuff. We can simply know that a major chord is made with the note intervals of 0, 4, 7 in semitone counting. So that's it. You now know how to form the major chord in any of the 18 key signatures. So congratulations, you have arrived. It really is that easy. And by now, I hope you had one of those aha moments. From now on, I suggest you consider the, quote, major triad chord to be the home base of all chords because many of the other chord types are just alterations. If you get lost in the chord forming process, just go back to the major formula and restart. So hopefully this has meaning to you, and now you may look at major chords completely different than anybody else has maybe tried to teach you or show you. Major chords formula is 0, 4, 7 in semitone counting. When you look it up in the books and resources, it will give you that same formula in note position numbers of 1, 3, and 5, but those are both the same. They're equivalents.
Now let's continue by looking at the minor chord type, the second most used chord, which requires only altering one note as compared to the home base major chord. Its chord formula is 0, 3, 7. Notice the one note interval change from semitone interval 4 in the major chord to semitone interval 3 in the minor chord, with the other two notes staying the same. Let me demonstrate randomly the 0, 3, 7 semitone count by forming a few minor chords. Remember the C chord that we looked at in the major chord was a 0, 4, 7, 0, 4, 7. And the minor chords use a 0, 3, 7 semitone count, so it's 0, 3, 7. Notice the change was only one note from the major chord, and it forms the minor chord, in this case a C minor, 0, 3, 7. Likewise, the other chords are formed the same way regardless of the key, using the 0, 3, 7 semitone count. For example, D minor, E minor, E flat minor, F minor, G minor, G sharp minor, A minor, and B flat minor. As in all chord types, they share a similar sound but not the pitch. Can you hear that chord type similarity despite the higher or lower pitch of these chords? And you might notice that minor chords present a sadder sound to create a darker feeling in songs. Now let me show you a diminished triad chord type. Its chord formula is 0, 3, 6, and as suggested by its name, we're going to move two different notes down by one semitone from their original home base triad major chord intervals. That is, the number 4 semitone count is moved down to a 3 semitone interval, and the 7 semitone count is moved down to a 6 semitone interval, while leaving the 0 note as it is. And in no particular order, let's look at a few diminished chords, such as E flat diminished. So here's your E flat chord. Here's an E flat minor, and And now here's an E flat diminished. Now let's look at an F diminished. Here's an F chord. Here's an F minor. And here's an F diminished. Now let's look at a G diminished. Here's a G chord. Here's a G minor. And here's a G diminished. Now let's look at a B diminished chord. Here's a B chord. Here's a B minor. And here's a B diminished chord. This is why a semitone count forming makes any chord so simple. All you have to do is follow the formula 0, 3, 6 for a diminished chord. And as you can hear, the sound provided by a diminished chord is very distinguishable and is used sometimes to pass quickly between two other chords.
Now let's move to the augmented chord type. As you can see, its semitone chord formula is 0, 4, 8. As suggested by its name, we are going to augment or move up one semitone interval, in this case from the semitone interval of 7 to the semitone interval of 8, while leaving the first two notes as is. This chord requires a bit more serious listening because only one note is being moved up one semitone. Augmented chords serve to provide a climbing movement in songs that are used somewhat sparingly. Let me show you a demo here. This is the C augmented chord. First we'll start with the C major. We learn 0 and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All we're doing is we're leaving these first two anchored, and then we're going to take this 7 and move it to the 8th position. So it's got that little bit of different sound to it. So it's moving up 0, 4, 8. That's 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that would be a C augmented chord. If you looked at a G, so we're at G major chord 0, 4, 7. We're just going to take our 7 and go up one semitone to the 8th semitone count, and so we've got 0, 4, 8, and that would be a G augmented. You can hear that going up a little bit better. And then if we just did again randomly a B flat, there's a normal B flat chord 0, 4, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're just going to take this 7th semitone count and move it up to the 8th. That's what a B flat augmented chord sounds like. So that's pretty much it. Now you can begin to see that we're using semitone counts to form these different chord types, and it's all just by the numbers. That way when we get to a chord, if we know what the formula is, we can do our counting much quicker and more accurately and really be confident that we're doing the right note instead of fishing around and trying to hear that amongst other musicians and whatever. So the semitone counting should give you the confidence using by the numbers, and they're always accurate. There's no exceptions to have to remember. Well, let's move on to the next triad listed here. The next two triad chords are called suspended chords and come really in two varieties. The first suspended variety has a semitone chord formula of 0, 2, 7. And is named and called a sus2 chord. Because the first two note intervals are very close together, it creates a very dissonant sound, which begs to be resolved. So let's look at 2 or 3 of these examples of the sus2 chord. So if we take a C, go back to our home base of C, and then we're going to go 0, 2, 7. So here's 0, 4, 7. So we're going to take the 4 and we're going to put it here to the 2. So it's 0, 2, 7. That would be written and named and called a sus2 chord. So it's 0, 2, 7. If we looked at an F chord, here's the F major chord. Here's the 0. This would be 1 and 2. We move that down to the 2. We keep this anchored. So this would be an F sus2 chord. You can hear that dissonance that's occurring between these two notes, they're so close together, it gives you that dissonance, which is in our ears. We want to somehow get that resolved pretty quickly. Here's one other example of a sus2 chord. Again, I'm randomly picking. Here's if we wanted to do an A flat sus2. Well, here's the A note, here's the A flat, and this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Just to remember, that is A flat major, and so we're going to move this this note from here down to, we're up 2 from 0, 1, 2. So it's this note, these three notes, the G sharp, A sharp, and the D sharp notes would form what we would know to be an A flat. Well, and I said A flat, so should call them, instead of sharp, we would call this an A flat, and we call this note a B flat since we're talking flats, and then this note an E flat. So it'd be A flat, B flat, and E flat to be more technically correct. So that would be an example of an A flat sus2 chord. Now the sister chord to that is called a suspended 4, or a sus4 as it's called, and most of the time they drop the 4 and just call it a sus chord. So when you hear someone wanting you to play a sus chord, that's assuming that they're talking about a sus4. If it's a sus2 chord that we just talked about, you have to say sus2, otherwise it's assumed to be a sus4 chord. And its formula in semitone counts is 0, 5, 7. So that creates a dissonance in a different direction. So if we took the C, 0, 4, 7, but now with a suspended 4, we're going to take this 3 and move it to this position of 5. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the chord total, a C sus4 chord, is going to be a C note, F note, and a G note. And that gives us that, again, up here, because the closeness of these two notes, it makes that very dissonant and wants it to resolve. So that would be an example of a C sus4 chord. If we took an E flat, here's an E flat, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we wanted to make a sus4 chord, then we're going to go 0, 5, 7. So here's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we're going to do the 7th is here. So that's an E flat sus4 chord. E flat, A flat, and B flat. So because these are suspended varieties, they add just a touch of sound spice, but they're harder to hear without really carefully listening. So after you've been on the seat of the piano for a good while, you'll begin to be able to hear these dissonance and yet suspended 2s and suspended 4 chords. Interestingly, playing the major chord in any key followed by a sus4 chord, then immediately followed by a sus2 chord, and then back to the major, you would probably have heard in church at the end of the song where they're doing amen. So let me demonstrate that in C. So here's the So that's the C major, C sus4, C sus2, back to the C major. That's a very common sound you would hear in church. Lastly, let me show you the power 5 chord. It has a chord formula of 0, 7, 12, basically 2 octaves on each end with the 7 semitone count interval in between. Lots of heavy metal bands use this, quote, powerful and explosive sounding chord. Here's a C power 5 chord. Here's the normal C chord. And then we're going to drop out this, play this C here, keep this 7 semitone count and add this top C octave. So we've got a C and a C. And there's a C power 5 chord. So it works in any key. It wouldn't matter if this is the B flat and you want to play a B flat power 5 chord, then we would go 0, and this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So it will be these notes, B flat, F, and B flat on top. That would be an example. So again, now you can see how these semitone count numbers are working. So that's it for the triad chord group, our group 1. Remember, what's common between these chord types is that they only contain 3 notes, and more importantly, the major triad is where all chords begin life. Thus, I consider that to be home base of all chords. That's the basic 0, 4, 7. You can in any key, so that's what I consider home base. I hope now that you can see how easy it is to form chords using the semitone counting process. It makes it so easy, and as you require more and more practice time in forming chords, you will automatically begin to learn these semitone count formulas by heart without even trying. And as we move forward through the other chord type groups, you'll see that these triad chord types are used first to begin the chord forming process, as additional note intervals are added as required by some chord formula, allowing us to create even more unique chord sounds. I hope you found this segment very useful, and so let's keep going. Now let's focus on the group 2, 6th and 7th chords. As you can see in this group, all these chord types share the same number of notes, 4. And you'll soon see that these first 3 notes in each of these chord types begins with some triad chord type, either a major, minor, or diminished chord type, and then ends with some added 4th note per the chord formula. Let's begin this group with the 6th chord. Its chord formula is semitone counts 0, 4, 7, 9. The 6th chord is one of those chords that you will run across every once in a while and gives a strong splash of sound spice without being a particularly happy emotion nor a particularly sad emotion. Because the semitone count intervals of 7 and 9 are only 2 semitones apart, this creates a bit of dissonance that, in part, distinguishes its unique sound. Again, the 6th chord's formula is semitone counts 0, 4, 7, 9. This is our first 4-note chord. Let me demonstrate forming a few 6 chords. Let's again begin with the easy one. Here is a C major, 0, 4, 7, and we're going to add then the 9 semitone count. So if this is 7, then here's 8 and 9. So we're going to play all 4 notes. That would be an example of a C6. Let's do a D6, and notice that we're starting with the major triad. Here's a D major triad, and this is semitone count 7, and we're going to go up to 9 and add that to it. There's 7, 8, and 9. So there's D, F sharp, G, and B would make a D6 chord. Here's an E6 chord. Here's an E, and then we go up from 7 and add 2 more. That would be an E6 chord. And then we would go another one. Here's an F. And then to get an F6, we would go up from the 7 and 2 more to 9. 0, 4, 7, 9. There is an F9. Here's an F sharp, if you will. Here's an F sharp. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 2 more, 1, 2. So these 4 notes, F sharp, A sharp, C sharp, and D sharp, give us an F sharp 6 chord. So again, we're back to the numbers. So just to mention that, in terms of guitar players, forming and playing 6 chords on a guitar would vary a bit, not the different notes, but would vary a little bit due to the differences in the guitar fretboard from the piano keyboard. These variances will be addressed in session 10 when we discuss voicing as connected to chord inversions. Moving on to the 2 basic types of 7th chords, the most often used 7th chord is simply referred to as a 7th chord, although you occasionally will see or hear it called a dominant 7th, which is actually the best and more descriptive term to use, as you will soon see. But both the terms seventh chord and dominant seventh chord are the same thing and are correct and use the same semitone count formula of 0, 4, 7, and 10. Because this set of note intervals are more widely separated from one another, you are able to distinctly hear the added flat seventh note, semitone count number 10, making it recognizable very quickly. And a very special comment before moving forward. It is this dominant seventh chord that confuses most musicians, and here's why. Despite the dominant seventh chord typically being named only with the number seventh, like the seventh chord, this number 7 actually represents the flat 7 note position number, not the, quote, real note position number 7. The real number 7 note position number is used to name what we call a major seventh chord, which has the equivalent semitone count number of 11, not 10. So it is this one semitone difference which is what distinguishes the major seventh chord from the dominant seventh chord. I know this may seem a little bit confusing at this point, but I can assure you by the conclusion of Session 8, this seventh chord naming issue will become much clearer. And you might also want to know that the dominant seventh chord we're talking about here is found in thousands of songs and is considered a leading chord, meaning its sound highly suggests the need for resolution to another chord. Remember, the dominant seventh chord formula is a semitone count number of 0, 4, 7, 10. Now let's look at forming a few of those dominant seventh chords. Here is a C major, the first 3 triad, and then we know that's 7 because we've got the formula 0, 4, 7, and then we need to go to 10, that's 8, 9, 10. So when we add this 4th note up here, a B flat, to the C major, we can hear it. We can hear that added 4th note pretty well. That is actually, in note position number, that's actually the flat 7. And that's part of the confusion I just talked about. So even though we call it a C 7th chord, it would be better to call the C dominant 7th, so we know that that's the 10 semitone count number. So here would be an E flat. So if we know that we're here at 7, 8, 9, 10, till you get used to playing it, you can hear an E flat, 0, 4, 7, 10. Count number would be an E flat 7th chord. Let's drop down to the F. You can hear that. In this case, the E flat note becomes the 10th note in this chord, and that is the F dominant 7th. Here's a G dominant 7th. There's 7. There's a G dominant 7th. Here's a G sharp. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's a G sharp dominant 7th chord. Here's an A. We start with the triad. There's the 7. We count 3 more up. 1, 2, 3. There is that A 7th chord. A 7th or dominant 7th is the more correct name. Here's a B chord. And then when we add that, there's 7, 8, 9, 10. So that would be a B 7th chord. If you should be able to hear that distinctive flat 7 note or the 10 semitone count in this particular key, then that's the flat 7 note or the 10 semitone count. And remember too that all the chords that we're speaking of here are in the root positions, and they always begin with the first 3 triad formula. So if it's a major, you do a 0, 4. If it's a minor triad, it could be then a minor 7th. So here's here's a major 7th chord, here's a major chord, here's a minor chord, and if we add the 7th note, it doesn't change. So here would be a major 7th, that I just showed you. Here's a minor 7th. All we're doing is moving that one down to get the minor chord or whatever other triad chord type it is. So let me now then demonstrate the major 7th chord type, since they're kind of sisters here and the ones that get confused the most. Although the major 7th chord is not used as often as the dominant 7th or just 7th chord, then we still need to know about it because you will see it on a number of occasions. A lot of times the major 7th chord, let me go ahead and demonstrate one. The major 7th is a semitone count. That 4th note is a semitone 11 count. So here's 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So in the case of C, we've got C, E, G, B. And a lot of times that is a nice little, the major 7th chord is used to end the song. It's got just a nice little mellow ending that brings closure to the song. So in this case, the major 7th formula in semitones is 0, 4, 7, 11. So every time I see a major chord listed on it, doesn't matter if it's a C major, C sharp, F sharp major, 7th, I already know that the 4th note is going to be that 7th note position number or the 11 semitone count. So it doesn't matter what I'm playing in. So I think you get the picture here. So in an attempt to reduce the confusion, the major 7th term helps us distinguish from the dominant 7th. So here's the dominant 7th, or what typically is just called the 7th. People got lazy with that, versus the major 7th. It's just only one note different. It's between the 10 semitone count and the 11 in this particular example of C. In fact, as a self-taught musician, I did not realize for years that there was a difference between a 7th chord, that is a dominant 7th chord, and a major 7th chord. I really didn't know there was a difference. That's really disclosing a lot of ignorance there on my part. So as much as these two chords are only one semitone different, they do indeed, though, create different tones, as you just heard. Now, the rest of the 7th chord types are just hybrids of what we've already learned. For example, the minor 7th, which I just did a second ago, contains the minor triad notes rather than the major triad notes, and then in addition to the flat 7 or the flat 7 or the semitone 10 count. Said more simply, the minor 7th chord formula in semitone counting is always 0, 3, 7, 10. So here we go. Let's just do C and do this quick. 0. Here's 3. 1, 2, 3. 7. And we know. And then 3 more is 10. So that would be a C minor 7th chord. If we went to a D and then we did a D minor, we're already here at 7, 8, 9, 10. So there would be a D minor 7th, the minor 7th formula of 0, 3, 7, and 10. So again, I think you understand this is just by the numbers. Once you get the formula for whatever chord that someone's asking you to play or you see on the sheet music, just get the formula, convert it to semitone counting, and you're good to go. So those are the demonstrations. The next two 7th chord types are just modifications of the basic triad diminished chords, and all we're doing is adding 7th notes to that. So you again can think of them as just hybrids. So if you see somewhere or need to play a half diminished 7th chord, its formula in semitone counts is 0, 3, 6, 10. So if this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7, 8, 9, 10. So we a little bit odd sounding, which is why it's kind of called a diminished, but it's a half diminished. 0, 3, 6, 10. And it doesn't matter what chord you can play that in, that's what it is. Now, if we want to play a fully diminished, what's called a fully diminished seventh chord, we only bring that down, your top note down. This is a C diminished, and then we're counting, and its formula is 0, 3, 6, 9, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So a fully diminished, or scratch that, a half diminished is the 10 semitone number here, count. A fully diminished is actually coming down, and it's the 9th semitone. So that would be a C fully diminished 7th chord. Sounds kind of crazy, but we'll still get this put together by names in session 8. But it's all based upon the semitone count formulas. So that's what we can use to go through any of these chords, and I'll make this one brief because now you're seeing how much the semitone count formulas are just numbers, and we kind of painting by numbers, and we're chording by numbers, and it doesn't get any more complicated than that. The last 7th chord type is rarely used, but I still want to show it to you as it is a good example of how its name contains clues as to how to form it. It's a minor major 7th chord, and as suggested, it's first formed with the 3 minor triad notes, followed by the, quote, major 7th note. So again, we're still a 4-note chord. Thus, the chord formula is 0, 3, 7, 11 note intervals. So let's look at 2 or 3 real quick. So we're 0, 3, 7, 11. This is a minor major 7th. So if we did a C, there's the C major. So if we just make that a C minor, we go from the 4 to the 3. So now we got the 0, 3, 7. Now instead of going up to the flat 7th position, we're going to the full 7th, so which is the 11th semitone count number. That's the 10 semitone count number. There's the 11th. So the minor major 7th, there's the minor, we add the major 7th note, and we get this sound. If we did that in F, here's the F major chord. Let's make a minor chord. We drop this to there. That's 0, 3, 7. And now we're going to play the 11th semitone. So if this is 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So in this F example, there's an F minor major 7th. Actually a very pretty chord. So the formula is 0, 3, 7, 11. That's 0, 3, 7, and 11 semitone count numbers. And again, you make that and form that in any key. That's why these chord formulas and semitones are just magic. So really, that's it for our 6th and 7th chord group, type 2 group of chords. Really not that sophisticated once you kind of look and break it down. Now let me discuss the third group of chord types, that of the extended chords. These chords are considered extended because they include notes that, quote, extend beyond the first chromatic octave of notes. In other words, these added chord notes go beyond the 7th range of notes and contain either 5, 6, or 7 notes as you see in the slide. Although most of these chords are used infrequently, they do show up in songs from time to time. To start, I'll show you the, quote, dominant 9th, the dominant 11th, and the dominant 13th chords, and then cover the major 9, major 11, and major 13th chords. Another unique feature about the extended chords is that as the extended notes are added beyond the basic triad chord notes, the chord must also include one or the other previous 7th notes. Let me repeat that. The 7th notes are pretty special, so when you're doing extended chords, it has to have either a dominant 7th note in it or a major 7th note, depending on what our formula tells us to do. But you have to have one of those 7th notes in that to make these extended chords work. As you see in the chord formulas on the slide, the 9th chord has 5 notes, the 11th has 6 notes, and the 13th chord has 7 notes. But we will also learn that it is generally accepted to omit a few of the select notes just to reduce the muddied sound that is produced by playing too many notes at one time. Thus, the chord formula for the dominant ninth chord type, more commonly known simply as the ninth chord, the formula in semitone counts is 0, 4, 7, 10, and 14. Let's look at a few of these. Now you understand semitone count numbers, so we're going to keep things by the number, and I'll kind of speed up a little bit. But we've got the formula, never changes, for ninth chords is 0. Let's use an F ninth chord. I'll show you an F ninth chord. So if this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that starts, and the triad begins with just an F major chord, F triad chord, if you will. And then we're going to add the 10th note. So if that's 7, 8, 9, 10. And then we're going to add the 14th note, which is the ninth note. So if that's 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So we're going to play those 5 notes, 0, 4, 7, 10, 14. And in this example, we're starting on the F note, so that would be an F ninth chord. That's, again, by the numbers like we've seen before. If we did a G, here's G is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We probably already know the G major chord. So we're going to add the notes 10. So there's 7, 8, 9, 10. And then we're going 1, 2, 3, 4 more to 14. So that would be a G ninth chord. And so, again, I won't take more time. Let's move on up to the dominant 11th, or what would be called the 11th chord. And there, our formula is 0, 4, 7, 10, 14, the same as the dominant ninth. And then we're going to add one more note, the actual 11th note, or the dominant 11th note, which is the 17th semitone count number. So let's just start again with the F, 0, 4, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then if we go 14, 11, 12, 13, 14, and then 3 more, 15, 16, 17. So those would be 0, 4, 7, 10, 14, and 17. And notice that as we add that 11th note, we're going to include the 9th note, which is the 14th note that we did before. So this would be an F 11th note, or an F dominant 11th note. In the case of the dominant 13th, we're going to then add one more. If this is an F dominant 13 chord, we're going to go on up beyond the 17th note, which is here, and we're going to go to 21, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21. So it would be these notes will make up that dominant 13th note. Let me be sure I've got that right. 0, 4, 7, 10, 14, 17, and 21. That's a 7-note chord. But again, and what we'll learn down the road, and it's too complicated to talk about that now, on some of these 13th chords, it's kosher to leave out or omit a few of the notes, and I'll show you that later on the ones that are acceptable to leave out, just because this gets kind of muddy, and it does require 2 hands to play it, depending on how you want to play it. So that's an example of a dominant 13th. Again, its semitone count formula is 0, 4, 7, 10, 14, 17, and 21. Sounds like a lot to remember, but it's not when you consider we start with a triad, whether that's a major triad or a minor triad or a diminished triad. Generally, we're going to be starting with either major, minor, or diminished chord, and then we're just adding notes to get these more sophisticated, or what we now call extended chords. Now let me demonstrate the major ninth chord types. Rather than the dominant ninth or just ninth, now we're talking about the major ninth, and its chord formula in semitone count intervals is 0, 4, 7, 11, 14. The only difference in this major ninth formula and the dominant ninth, or just ninth, is that number 10 and number 11, that fourth note, is either going to be the flat 7 note, the 10 semitone count, or in this case, for a major ninth, we're using the 11th semitone count, or the actual 7th note position number. So it's 0, 4, 7, 11, 14. And let's just demonstrate again here because we've got the view. If we made a F major ninth chord, it would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which we already know that's the beginning triad, and then we're going to add the 11th note. So if this is 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then we go on up to 14, 11, 12, 13, 14. So these 5 notes played together is, in this case, an F major ninth chord. We're just using the numbers 0, 4, 7, 11, and 14. If we did an E, then here's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we're going to go from 7 to 11, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then 12, 13, 14, 12, 13, 14. And it's a beautiful chord, so that is an E major ninth chord. We're starting with an E triad, and we're adding that 11th and that 14th. And remember, this 11th in this example is, that actually is the 7th note position, not the flat 7, but the 7. And you got to remember that any note on here can be any of the note position numbers depending on what key or chord you're starting with. So in this case, that's 0, 4, 7, 11, and 14, the E major ninth. If we go, and we're going to keep the same thing, if we wanted to play a major 11th, the next extended chord, we're going to take these same notes, and we're at 14, 15, 16, 17, so we're going to add the 17th, and now we've got an E major 11. That's got the six notes in that particular chord. And then when we go to the in this case, we'll just stay on the E. If we wanted to play an E major 13th, we're going to go ahead and add the 21st. So there's 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. It gets kind of full-handed here. So there's the 11. So it would be these notes. So again, it can get muddy and get complicated. It certainly takes 2 hands to do that. Notice that all the previous identified notes continue to accumulate, but it's still all based on the chord formula. And because I'm using semitone portion of the chord formula, then it's just by the numbers. So I would think now that you're really getting the hang of how all these chords are formed. Whether it's a basic triad chord all the way up to these extended chords, we're still using numbers. It's always accurate. It's always the same. There's no exceptions to remember. And so basically, that's how we can make any extended chord, no matter what it is and no matter what key it's in. We can play it in C, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, anything. Now let's look at the altered group of chord types. They are an interesting breed of chords because, as their name suggests, one or more of the notes in a particular chord has been, quote, altered. And know that you can study altered chords in greater depth and more advanced detail, so I'm only covering the basics here, especially since they are not used that frequently. But the good news is that altered chord names typically indicate the notes that need to be altered, as in the examples you see here. However, you might run across a few chords that are abbreviated with the ALT abbreviation in their name, which can be a bit more complicated to translate. And yet, like all other chord types, altered chords begin life as either a triad, a 7th, or an extended chord. Then, as indicated in the chord's name, certain notes are either sharpened or flattened to change them from their original, quote, diatonic tone to some, quote, altered tone. As a reminder, remember that all chord names that contain numbers are referring to note position numbers, not semitone count numbers. Although I immediately convert the note position numbers to semitone count numbers as I form the chord, as you've seen here previously now many times. And 2, as a reminder, I have included the comparison chart of note position numbers with semitone count numbers we saw back in session 5. So this group of altered chords you are now viewing are some common ones that you might run across from time to time, but this list only represents a very small portion of the chords that could be included in this group. For example, the first altered chord listed here in our chart is pronounced as a 7th with flat 5. As shown, the chord formula to make this chord in semitones is 0, 4, 6, 10. So let me demonstrate using the typical C chord here. It's pretty easy to see. So if we first form a C 7th chord, that means the 7th is actually the flat 7 note position, or the number 10 semitone count. If we start there, then it's saying by its name, by its altered name, it says let's have a flat 5. Well, we break this down. That 5 is talking about note position number 5, which is here. And it's basically saying with a flat 5. So we need to play a flat 5 rather than a 5, all these being the same. And then we add the flat 7. So this chord would be a C7 with a flat 5. And that flat 5 in the name itself is saying, hey, take your 5 note and flatten it. So that would be a C7 flat 5. Pretty interesting and pretty simple stuff. Now here's an interesting fact about a 7th chord with a sharp 9. So again, it's an altered. As soon as we see the name sharp 9, the 7th is the 7th. We've already understood those and covered that. But now it's saying sharpen the 9th note. So interestingly, one of these 7th with a sharp 9 kind of became famous by Jimi Hendrix back in the 60s in the song Purple Haze. And specifically, he was using an E7th sharp 9, that is an alter chord, and commonly known now as the Jimi Hendrix chord. Its formula then would be 0, 4, 7, 10, and 15. I'm going to play it down here, but I'm going to actually play the chord because he played an E7 sharp 9. So if we start with an E, that's 0, 4, 7. And then we're going to, in this case, we're altering the very last note, the 9th, we're altering it to a sharp 9. So we're still going to do it. Now there's the E7th, 0, 4, 7, 10, and now that last 9th note is a count of 14. So if we're here at 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, so if we played that would be a chord of an E 9th chord. But it's saying to sharpen the 9th note, so here's the 9th note, so we're going to play the sharp 9. So the Jimi Hendrix chord then, the E7 sharp 9 would be these. You can hear that dissonance and really kind of a weird sound, but that's why it's kind of become famous, because he used it in that song Purple Haze. So really that's it. I'm just using the semitone formula counts that we've talked about. You'll be able to get to all of those quickly. So notice that I'm making that chord had to be with both hands. So in reality though, and in conclusion with altered chords, you could actually make up or create your own list of altered chords if it sounds good to you. You would just indicate what notes to flatten or sharpen in the chord name. And again, we'll look at that again in session 8 coming up about chord names. But that's really it with the altered chords. So they're kind of a mix of a lot of different things, and you can put it to good use and make it in songs that you want an odd or a very different flavor to it. I hope this session has shown you not only the process of forming chords, but also the specific chord type names and chord formula information needed to form them. And you should now know why and how note position numbers and semitone count numbers are related and their importance in forming chords. And if you feel the information presented in this session is not represented in a user-friendly fashion for your needs, remember that I have a one-page document that I mentioned back in session 6 that might be helpful. I say this not to be a salesperson, but it has been the one document I created and kept handy for years that allowed me to improve my chord forming knowledge and abilities by tenfold. It is a one-page, one-sided document entitled Chord Types and Formulas, the best cheat sheet ever. If you're interested in obtaining this document, you may contact me at pianochordcoach@gmail.com for instructions on how to get one for your own personal use. In closing, I hope you enjoyed this session and hope now your vocabulary of and about chords has increased greatly. And I want to thank Mike Furlong for his help in this session. And now I'll look ahead. In our next session, session 8, entitled Understanding How Chords Are Named, I'll show you the logic and patterns that are used in how chords are named, so stay tuned, it should be fun. And I'll mostly use chord name examples where we can break down and analyze the chords to take the mystery out of them, on particularly how they're formed and named. And now you may begin the process to bestow yourself with the title of chordologist. Just one more session to go. And as always, thank you for your time and attention. Please subscribe if you found this session helpful in your music theory journey as an absolute beginner.